Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has been trying to chase his wife into his home office for 3 weeks, asking if she wants to do sex.
Long ago. Really? That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
That is actually often how people mispronounce
often
it.
Mispronounce it that way, and that's what came to me today. So.
All right. Oh, good. That's good.
Yep.
I didn't see that coming. You warned me on.
I know. Jen doesn't listen to the podcast, so she won't know I ever said that. But
well, I'll tell her.
My original version actually had her asking, but I was like, no, that doesn't make sense because he's the one who's playing the game. So anyway, hello, we're playing Deus Ex lately.
Yes, we are. What episode? This is the third.
This is the third episode already, and I'm so far behind.
You'll get there. No, I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the end of the game actually starts to speed up after a while, so I don't feel like I'm crazy behind. And with Hong Kong behind me, I feel like that's the biggest, meatiest section of the game, and it's something we talked a little bit about in pre-show. Maybe
I think that's the hump. Yeah, you're over the hump.
I think that is the hump, and I feel like that's probably a good place to start because I think a huge amount of story stuff gets kind of brought in and integrated into the story at that point. You've already met by then Majestic 12, but you hear hints of the Illuminati. There's of course this VersaLife Corporation. You're learning more about this virus. Everything's kind of coming together, and you're getting this feel, as well as having lots of in-level, just for this one level, factional stuff. You've got two different I don't want to say crime syndicates, but tongs or gangs that they're at war, and you've got the influence of Maggie Chow, who's an outside actor who's acting in bad faith. I mean, you have a lot of really rich story material that I love, set against a level that the connectivity of which I didn't particularly love when I first played it. Found it a little bit easier the second time around. I think too, when you're playing a lot faster than I did back when I originally played this game, that stuff bothered me a little bit less because I didn't get into a lot of side areas that I didn't really care about. It might be to my detriment down the road, but at least in the moment it felt a little bit better. Anyway.
Well, yeah, and and what I was going to say is I think to your point, by the end of Hong Kong, you basically, I don't know, I would say like 75% of all the key 75 or 80% of all the key main players of the sort of, plot have been talked about, at least. You know what I mean? There's still a couple mysteries to be revealed and a little bit more about some specific villain characters coming. But, I was joking in pre-show that by the end of Hong Kong, you've probably heard almost all of the proper nouns and I had forgotten about that, but by the time, because especially at the end of Hong Kong, Tracer Tong, as we were talking about in pre-show, starts mentioning the Illuminati, as Brett mentioned. And so by that point, another just addition to the convoluted, set of intertwined.
They're really throwing everything into.
Oh my gosh, I had forgotten.
It is a gigantic conspiracy smoothie at this point. I mean, they just are blending in so many different things. There are, like you said, a couple things coming, especially with Area 51, as I recall, being a place where you end up. That's a big element that's still missing. So they do manage to kind of top themselves with like, oh, you thought this was crazy. Yeah, we're going to put this in too, right? Which is kind of funny and maybe something we'll talk about next week. But that Area 51, effectively 100 years after it was even a thing, is still a thing in this game, which is kind of an interesting choice. It's almost like their conspiracy stuff, the deep conspiracy stuff, is all still drawn from basically today, like FEMA and the UN and black helicopters and
oh my god, Echelon 4. Right, the Illuminati, and then they introduced Majestic 12, which I think is just in this game, right? I don't think that's
I don't know. I feel like Majestic was
maybe it is. Maybe it's. I didn't look it up.
Thing. Yeah,
it might be.
Yeah,
but then,
no, it is. It's the UFO conspiracy theory.
Oh, that's right.
So it does. If you knew that going in, you might realize why that ties into Area 51 and things like that. But yeah, that there is a Majestic.
Yeah. Sort of the alien element. Yeah.
To Truman, but it's funny how that stuff just carries forward, and that's and yet it works. Like, you don't in the moment think this doesn't make any sense. 50 years, 70 years after we're thinking about this stuff in the year 2000, that this is still a thing. But I don't know. Apparently those things, if they're real, like, they live on, right? I guess. Well,
also remember this time, right? With the the millennium, and Y2K and just the I don't know. I feel like the collective consciousness around this stuff was very much about that.
Yeah,
kind of what's going to happen in the next century.
The X-Files and that show Millennium.
Yep. But X-Files specifically, yeah. I mean, I'm a huge X-Files fan, and I just ate this stuff up at the time because that's all what that show was about, right? It was conspiracy upon conspiracy and just all these different intertwined backstabbing and who's on whose side and just all this sort of crazy stuff. And then we didn't even mention, like, VersaLife is another proper noun they introduce from a company. So they have the corporate espionage side of it, as well as all of the government and military and all that kind of stuff. And then the game starts off with these two acronyms that they kind of throw out there what they stand for, but you kind of forget easily, with UNATCO and the NSF being these two oppositions. And then that provides sort of a switching sides moment for JC as well, and his brother. And so I just had forgotten until starting the game back up about how complicated it was. And even this time, having played it, I guess this would be sort of my third time. I'm still getting confused sometimes about who's on what side and who I should be rooting for. And it's cool, though, in a way, because it does create that sort of, trust no one kind of mentality.
Exactly. Which you feel like you don't even know where to turn. And if it weren't, you feel like, I feel like it's a valid choice to not trust Tracer Tong, who is sort of a hero of the franchise, I would say. He's a character, I think, who appears as his younger self in the he may even be in Deus Ex Invisible War, probably is.
Is he in the prequel though?
But yes, in the new games, Mankind Divided and Human Revolution, I think he appears in both of them.
Oh, interesting. I haven't played them. Yeah,
as a very young man, so they kind of stretch.
That's kind of neat.
What his age must have been, or something like that. He definitely shows up. He definitely shows up in Human Revolution. Oh, he doesn't show up in Mankind Divided, so I'm mistaken about that. But
so just the first.
Yeah, right. Just the first remake, which is sort of like a cameo that makes a lot of sense. Of like, let's bring in some familiar faces and find a way. It's almost like an Assassin's Creed technique to bring in a historical figure.
Right. Oh yeah.
In this case, the historical figure is a historical figure from a game. But it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. No.
It's like meeting young Leonardo da Vinci or something like that. When you're playing Ezio in the Assassin's Creed 2 storyline, which is that's a huge distraction. But anyway,
well, then there's also, I think, even related to a specific plot, whether it be characters or devices or organizations. I think the other thing that they go deep into is just thematic content, whether it be, we talked about this in pre-show too. They also hit every flavor of that, being cloning, robotics, nanomachines, corporate espionage, the government controlling a virus, and then also the cure for the virus, the vaccine, which is a big X-Files theme, and they just, it's, you can kind of say it's kitchen sinky and kind of just throwing everything in, but to some degree, it's exactly the fantasy fulfillment they're trying to achieve. Matrix, we talked about, right? Like just the Matrix influence on both thematically, but also stylistically. And then just because I'm playing a hacker computer electronics person in between all of my shooting everyone with guns, that fantasy is just fun too, because you just feel like, Neo a little bit in that you're that master hacker and just kind of you're manipulating everything around you, and it fits all those themes really well.
Right. No, it's great to walk up to a computer and hit that hack button and watch the timer go down and know that it's running in real time at the same time, which pulls in cyberpunk RPGs like literally Cyberpunk 2020 or Shadowrun, I think, is the same way, where it's, well, sure, you're in the Matrix or whatever they call it, the net or whatever, the web, but all the people you're with are still in reality. Of course, in this game, there's just one of you, and you're there trying to do this thing, and somebody might be walking around. I actually had that happen with the final showdown with Maggie Chow, who I just avoided because I'm not killing anybody if I can help it.
No, she didn't make it.
Yeah,
for me.
Well, she wouldn't have made it for me either because the whole building seems to be coming down around our ears. But but I didn't kill her. But I ran away from her and entered the code. But while I'm sitting there hacking that little terminal, I know time is not paused.
No, I had that happen multiple times. You can hear the guards come up on me all the time.
Right.
And you have to make that decision.
It's a thing that we mentioned last time, is that the cutscenes play out as if they're happening in real time and you're still in the world. Now, the people will not shoot at you. They're kind enough to not interrupt your conversations. But if they see, they'll kind of line up and be ready. Well, as soon as this guy stops talking, we're going to shoot him. And so it's really the same sort of thing, except they'll shoot you while you're hacking as well. So especially in those hacking moments or multi-tool or lockpick environments, which reminded me of Thief because you can actually see the world. You have that same tension of, are they going to catch me while I'm doing this thing? Can I get away with it? And can people see me? So I think that's all of that is really kind of terrific. Unless you actually pause the game by hitting escape, it's always running. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that that's clear. And I also appreciate the tension that they're able to derive from that at times. So it doesn't always work, but sometimes there's real good tension there.
Yeah, the music's good. It fits with it. And like you said, the timer's ticking down, so you have that kind of tension. And even though there's not a mini game there, I'm sure, it's you can imagine one there. And then the influence that this game had on these kinds of games where mini games were introduced for hacking and stuff that added even more tension.
Right.
One's not coming to mind, but I feel like.
It's funny because BioShock has a hacking mini game, but I don't think time is moving while you're doing it. You just go into it and now you're hacking.
Oh, it might be, yeah.
Yeah, and the same certainly with Fallout 3 or I assume 4, that when you go in there, or Skyrim with lockpicking, there are mini games for those things, but they're more just simple fiddling with skills on the player. The player has some player skill, and there's a character skill level as well, and those things interact in some way to narrow the window or widen it where you can be successful. But time is effectively stopped, and I think that's usually the case. So this is kind of an anomaly, and Thief, like I said, is one as well, where if you're picking a lock with the 2 lockpick tools that I think you have in Thief, you are basically doing that and hoping nobody walks by while you do it, and it takes a while. It has that sort of that same timer counting down mechanism, which is great.
I think it just fits well with what they're trying to do fantasy wise.
Yeah,
in Thief,
you almost never see that anymore, and I do. That's a thing I kind of miss. I understand why it's less common, but I miss the tension that it.
Yeah, I mean it's that common theme we've talked about on the podcast a few times of like the danger of usability sometimes, right? And over worrying about that, and kind of not necessarily watering things down, but making things more usable, which makes sense and less frustrating for the player. But then you lose some of that magic as well, right?
Right. It's
the
a
Dark
pendulum
Souls
thing, right? The pendulum has kind of swung maybe a little too far in some of these areas. Certainly, though, I think that if you're making any kind of real-time action game where you have these, I'm embodied in the world and doing a thing, I think it makes sense to still have these here. So, and I don't think it would mess with players' heads. You have to, I mean, the issue is that you can't go too far, right? I think that the issue with the things that have mini games is that now you're so focused on that mini game that there's maybe too much complexity to deal with while also managing the time thing. Something like the pipe dream implementation in BioShock might be too much to do, right? So that's the trade-off I think you're making in those cases.
Yeah. There's a sweet spot.
Yeah. No,
yeah, I mean, there's definitely games that do it better than others. And yeah, I actually was never a fan of the BioShock one specifically, but it just kind of brought me out of it, too much, because it was such a specific mini game. But I feel like in this,
it's pipes underwater, pipes.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think it's just the game designer in me, because I know the mini game that I feel like, okay, this is pipe dreams or
a LucasArts game, right?
Yeah, it's like I get it. It kind of fits, but I don't like, you know what I mean? It just kind of breaks you out of it. Here, though there isn't an explicit mini game, you just get the sense that he's typing on the keyboard while you know what I mean? I don't know.
Right.
Or his nanomachines are doing something, but
or his hacking. I mean, I do like the abstraction of like, I have some icebreaker installed and it's just doing its magic. It just takes time. And so there is just that sort of tension of, I don't know how long it's going to take to do its thing. And so I definitely appreciate that. There's definitely an aspect of that. And I think that if you were to take something like Netrunner, the card game, where it's there's different types of ice and you need different strengths of things, it would be way too much. Obviously they made a whole card game around just that aspect. So you definitely, you want to find that streamlined sweet spot, and I think they do a pretty good job here, where it's time based. Sometimes you can see what's going on, sometimes you can't. You always have to face the thing, so you always kind of can't in that way. Because you're facing a wall, basically, because something's mounted on the wall that you're going to hack or unlock. So I think all of that works really well, and I appreciated it this time, especially this where I'm doing more of it seems. So
well, and I also appreciate the other thing I was going to add is that to your point about like having the game clock still running and simulated behind you while you're doing it, as opposed to the games that kind of just lock that stuff off, basically pause time. It causes, which I think is direct alignment with the rest of the game and the themes and the overall creative direction of the game. It is in full alignment with the making hard decisions theme of the game, in that if I want to hack, I need to be either aware of where the guards are, or I need to take them out. I have to make a decision on timing and it takes time. And so I've had multiple moments where I didn't want to deal with the guards, even though I am generally killing everybody. Sorry to say, but I didn't want to deal with them. So, I was kind of just trying to get lucky on how much time I had, not really kind of, counting the clock or anything. And, it's a decision I have to make. And then it adds that tension, because I know it's not, that they're not paused, but it just causes me to, forces me to make those hard decisions and take the risk, versus the safe version of just pausing it and know you're going to be safe. So I think that's in line, right? Because
yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. This is a game about lots of hard decisions, and that's another one. And I mean, there's been a number of times where I've gone, I'm like, can I really do this? Will I have time to do this before the camera sweeps across the room or whatever it is? I mean, there's a number of different, before this guard comes back around the corner, and there's a number of things.
Yeah.
And sometimes I mess up. As I mentioned, I've been doing sort of knucklehead stealth, and usually I just go back if I messed that up, and I didn't realize I had less time than I thought. But it's, I still feel the tension. I still feel that moment of not knowing. So no, I agree. It totally works and is perfect thematically for this game. And a real strength, I think.
Yeah. Did we establish that knucklehead stealth is did you get that from someplace, or do we have to give you credit for that amazing?
No, I came up with that on the fly while we were talking.
I think that's a thing we need to coin, because I think it's a perfect. Well, I think it's a perfect description of that kind of playthrough, because somebody I've talked about on the cast before, Anthony Gallegos, who's on Rebel FM, and
sure,
he's
I've
game
talked
developer.
with Anthony before.
He talks a lot about his version of stealth gameplay, which I would also call knucklehead stealth, which is, best intentions starting off, and I'm really going to stealth my way through this, and then the S hits the fan, and then it's like, well, okay, everyone's going to die. It's like we just kind of stumble through the rest of it, and I think that's just a great description that we need to call and trademark.
I've done a search on knucklehead stealth, and it turns out all of the almost everything on the first page comes from our podcast.
Are you serious?
Yes.
That's hilarious. All right, sold. We got it. We got to coin.
I nailed it.
We got to get that URL quick. knuckleheadstealthstories.com.
Got it.
And now I've totally distracted myself.
It's fine.
I know what I was going to say.
Okay, go ahead.
To finish off the hacking theme, and we can move on back to story maybe. The other thing that we talked a little bit about it, but we have to mention, they do this in pretty much every macro, or really, I guess, subsystem in the game, because of the augmentation and skill system that they have to provide multiple ways to do things, which we've talked a lot about. But with hacking specifically, if you didn't commit to that to be able to do it effectively, and you explore, you often can find the logins for those for many computers as well. Right. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and again, the commitment for them to go after that was mind blowing at the time, and it's still today, because it's still hard to get people to justify 3 ways to do one thing. And it's like, well, why would we spend the money to do that? Right, like, exactly. Well, actually, it's way better for the player in a game like this to give them those options. And so I just want to call that out, just because we're talking so deeply about hacking. Even though it's so simple, they actually do still have multiple ways to do a thing in most cases. So
yeah, absolutely. And there are definitely cases where, I mean, different playthroughs allow even more options. So you can find the code, you can hack it, you can use a multi-tool, you can whatever. I mean, there's a number of different things. But then there's also there's traps and things where it's just like you can just run through the lasers.
Yeah.
Instead of worrying about trying to figure out, or you can stand in front of the camera and the turret and shoot them down. You can just deal with it.
Or you can just hack the turret directly.
Or you can hack the turret directly. You can, instead of trying to find some panel somewhere, security console or whatever, and so there are numerous. So you basically end up with, just to deal with a turret. So like, well, I could hack the security console. I could find the code for the security console. I could use weaponry, or I could hack the turret itself. And that's just for that pairing of two things. And
I think also you can find the electrical panel, right? And just turn off the whole system.
Right. That's also true. That shows up sometimes as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so not every turret, but which usually is associated with the lasers, and so because I have a high electronics as well as computers, so I'm also turning electricity off quite a bit, and because it's so high, it only takes me like one multi-tool. So yeah, it's just incredible the amount of depth in that stuff. So anyway,
Yeah, I've been stocking up on multi-tools. I've got like a dozen, so I'm good.
Yeah, they're super valuable.
Yeah. If I can find another way around, I usually do. So let's go back to the story stuff, because we kind of were diving into that a little bit, as far as how it brings all this kind of different stuff. But were there some other things you wanted to hit there?
Yeah, well, I want to go back to basically. I think last episode we ended where you had ended, which was the airfield, I believe, right? LaGuardia Airfield, and then
Correct,
not long after that, I forget exactly how it happens, but you get captured, right? Essentially,
right.
You go back to the headquarters.
I was wondering how that played out for you, because since I'm trying not to kill anybody, I didn't fight my way out, but I got really far out. I went, I managed to get out of Hell's Kitchen into the subway, which was at Battery Park, I guess. And Anna Navarre confronted me in the subway station, but I got past her without killing her. And then I finally emerged out in Battery Park, and Gunther came up and was like, you can either surrender or we fight. And so I was like, well, I guess I'll surrender, because I'm not going to fight.
Oh yeah, no, definitely didn't happen that way for me.
Oh yeah, well that's an interesting difference. What happened for you?
Well, and that's why I'm trying to remember exactly where it happened, because it was enough weeks ago that but when do they start? So you're in Hell's Kitchen, so that must be. Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're in Paul's apartment, right?
Right. You go find your brother,
Yeah.
Basically, when it all goes down, is that he's like, "I can't go with you. I'm too injured. I won't be able to make it. You'll have to go without me."
Yeah.
I snuck through. I knocked out a guard so that I could make it to the subway, which I had opened previously. I got the code and I opened it and went back. Because I wanted that door to be open, so I didn't have to stop and wait, because there's like robots walking around,
right?
And I didn't want to have to worry about that. So and so I could run right down into there and hop on the subway, and then Anna Navarre showed up basically on the other end of that level load.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, so that's like what, 20, 30 extra minutes of gameplay for you or something?
Oh, easily.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I had to try it many times. Getting the timing right, that was definitely a knucklehead stealth moment, because I'd shoot the one guy. I was like, okay, well, there's one guy I have to take out, because he is literally looking where I'm going to come from. I can't get around him any other way. But then everything else was timing of there's a guy on this side of the street, there's a guy on this side of the street, there's a robot, and all of them are out of sync. There's no perfect time to do it. So you have to basically let the guy on my side of the street walk past me. The guy on the far side of the street won't pick me up until too late. So I have to move down to where the robot can't see me, because there's this wrecked car in the way. And then if it picks me up, I just get up and run. But if it doesn't, I can just kind of slip past it at that point. So yeah, that was a tricky section. And in the end, I didn't remember that I was going to end up in the jail. I mean, I sort of did, because I got killed numerous times doing this, and you still wake up in the jail if that happens. But that I didn't know how far you could push it. And so I was kind of curious what you did there and how far you pushed it.
Oh my God. I mean, it's like night and day. We're playing completely different. That's why it's so exciting to play this game. We're playing completely different games. Like it's not even close. So for me, it's like, and I had died really quickly, so I knew what was going to happen. So I was like, oh, okay, well, can I prevent that from happening in the way that I'm playing? So what my version of that is how big of a bloodbath can I create to try to avoid getting captured? And of course, you may not see this, or maybe because you went out the window, I assume, right?
I did, yeah.
Because Men in Black, which we didn't even mention as another one of the themes, Men in Black come into they break into his room right away, and they're pretty powerful. And so you heard, so I'm like, okay, these guys are going down. So I played multiple times trying to kill all of those guys, and then that didn't work because that's impossible. from the power level that I'm at that point. And there's like probably, I don't know, it felt like 12 of them out there. So they clearly didn't want you to win. So then I started going out the window, guns a-blazing, and trying to take out as many people as I can, running through the streets, basically. They're just like a madman, like for my life. But ultimately I just was like, well, clearly there's no way I can play this way and get very far. Probably restarted maybe 8-10 times, and then so then I just gave in and assumed that they're once you get killed, then you're going to end up in the jail every time. And then I remembered that's exactly how it has to happen, so I just submitted.
Right. I don't think there's any
way
that turns out.
But
right.
It's super fascinating to see how far you got, though. That's really cool. Because for me, again, I was just basically playing a run and gun shooter,
right,
which not doing a great job, and so that I really didn't have much of an option. But
yeah, I mean, I basically would learn more stuff each time. It's really Anna and Gunther.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I didn't see Gunther at all.
Right, there are characters who are scripted at numerous places where they're going to approach you as soon as you enter a space, and for me, getting into the subway and knowing Anna was coming, I had to immediately crouch and quickly move towards the nearest vent to get past her without her approaching me and kicking off a cutscene where she's like, surrender or I'll kill you. And it was really funny because one time I missed and we had the conversation and I was still crouched and I was like, well, maybe I can get away still. And she's like, I see you.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah, she's like, I know you're there. It was really funny.
In the vent?
Yeah, well, I hadn't got to the vent yet, but I'm like crouch walking towards a vent, and she's like, I can see you, don't you?
No, come on, you're lying. That didn't happen.
No, it totally happened. It's a great moment.
That is hilarious.
I laughed so hard. But then once you get up to where Gunther is, which is in that sort of homeless area that's in Battery Park with the shacks and stuff, there's nowhere to go. You're in this tiny little shack and he sees you as soon as you come out. So we call that in Bethesda speak, we call that a forced greet, where you're forced into conversation with this character.
Yeah. They run up to you. Whenever you see an NPC running at you, then not shooting, you're like, well, the cutscene's about to happen.
Exactly. Actually, let's take a quick digression on cutscenes, because that is one thing that I had forgotten was a thing in this game, is that they do a really good job of procedural camera placement. And this is an early game for that. I don't know about first, but certainly early. And I feel like they may have even written up a game developer magazine article about the rules of camera usage. Like, you can't cross the plane, the 180-degree rule, right? You have to stay. Once you've established this character's on the left in the room and this character's on the right in the frame, you can't switch to the other side of the room. So that's a thing that they had to keep in mind. They have to do basically their first camera cuts in real time. Obviously, a character runs up and it's, now you're having a conversation. We have to put the camera somewhere basically immediately. And then they move the camera around as well, and they cut and they try to focus on who's speaking. They have more time to make those choices, but yeah.
Have you noticed that they not move your character, or
they do not move the characters?
Because interesting, yeah. So so it would have to be procedural.
Yeah, they have to basically look and say, okay, well, and sometimes you can see it break. I mean, that's a problem that we had in Fallout 3, Skyrim, Fallout 4 with the various kill cameras, is that picking a place where you can see everything and nothing gets in the way is difficult. And there are times where things will get in the way of a good composition, but they're maybe not really black. Sometimes they're transparent. I can remember the most recent one I saw was with Tracer Tong, where there's all these computer screens in his room, in sort of his area where he is, which is kind of a bad pathological case for this kind of technology.
Yeah, it's very cluttered.
Yeah, but there are all these kind of sort of waist to ceiling screens that are semi-transparent, like they're projected onto glass or something. I'm not sure what they're supposed to be. But
and he's also walking around that room.
He's walking around that room, so he could pick you up at any point. You could sort of approach him anywhere. But it still does a really good job with few exceptions of, because you meet him in that room several times. It does a pretty good job of finding good places to put the camera. I don't remember all the things that they mentioned in terms of framing, but it's also the rule of 2/3, which is you want your areas of focus to be at 1/3 of the screen and at 2/3 of the screen. So basically the characters, they want to frame them in such a way that they appear basically at that point in the screen as well. Yeah. And all of this stuff they do fairly well. Even if they move the camera at kind of more oblique angles and stuff like that. So it was pretty cool to see. And I do remember that being a thing at the time. You still don't see it too often because generally speaking, we fully animate cutscenes like those these days. We just say, oh, you're in this place. The player will be fine if we just pick a place for this character to be, that you're having this conversation, even if you really ran into him somewhere else in the same environment. So it is really interesting to see them pushing that, almost 20 years ago. So cool stuff.
And I wonder, I hadn't thought about it as much as you had, but I did make a note related to a possible legacy to Mass Effect, because I remember, I don't know if they ever cited it, or if it was just the era of these games trying to all crack that same nut, and if they ever cited Deus Ex as a, but Mass Effect made a big, BioWare made a big deal about their, because you're right, you can hand craft those, but they made a big deal that they had so many dialogue cutscenes that they needed to find programmatic way to make all of them look really good and cinematic, but be able to work anywhere, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when I saw these in Deus Ex, I'd forgotten about them, and then it kind of reminded me immediately of Mass Effect, because it's framing and dialogue and the sort of head and shoulders sort of framing of the characters and those sorts of things. It was very reminiscent of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It definitely calls that to mind for me as well. I think in those cases it's a little easier because you're basically putting the camera, you can almost author the camera in that point of, oh, we have this node that we attach to the character that we animate, and we just put it someplace reasonable as a default, and maybe we can sweep around from that. And I think that's probably the way to do it, to have more artistic control than you can have in a fully procedural system. But I do think back then they were experimenting with all that and basically using physical information about the world to determine, basically, there's no view. Let me try this location. Oh, there's no view. Let me try this location. Okay, there's no view there either. Fall back on this, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So anyway, it's pretty cool.
That's a good point. Yeah. Well, yeah. Heading back to the story points that are happening. So we're now both captured by, I think, the group we had been introduced to Majestic 12 at that point.
Right. That's you're basically in the Majestic 12 holding facility or something like that.
And we have the Metroid moment where all your stuff's taken away.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to rebuild that back up, and you're in a cell, which you've seen similar cells potentially wandering around the UNATCO, base before. And then, you work your way through that section, kind of, taking out guards and sneaking around or doing whatever you can to find weapons and such, in my case. And it's pretty messy for me because I'm not doing much of a stealth run. So it's hard to kind of, you can't survive long if you're just kind of barnstorming through. But then the cool thing about the moment is, if you had fully explored the UNATCO base before, you'd gone down to level 4 and seen this locked door that looked very top secret and off limits, and of course you couldn't get into. And then once you get out of this cell and out of this prison that is this new organization's prison of Majestic 12, and you're this mysterious organization, you're not sure who they are and all this stuff and why did they capture you, you eventually escape out a door, and it ends up being the door at the level 4 in the UNATCO base. So that I just remember the first time playing this section back in the day and just loving that realization and just revelatory moment of like, oh my God, this is the place I was before.
Yeah.
That's what's been behind her this whole time. So this mysterious organization clearly is a part of UNATCO, and it's just a cover up. And now I see who the real bad guys are or whatever, and I'm coming out of this place that has been this mystery right underneath our noses the whole time. So that was a great moment.
Yeah, no, I love that moment. I got to the same point where I just was running up on this, and I'm like, I have no idea what's behind this. And you open the door, and you're like, oh yeah, I know exactly where I am now. And at that point, you have the opportunity at that point, I think, to do a number of different things. Confront your old boss, Manderley. There's other stuff too, but and you have to have the fight with for me, Anna. I don't know.
Yeah.
That might be always the same. I don't know.
It was for me as well. But the cool thing about it is, which we should talk about a little bit, maybe just for a moment, the structure of the game when it comes to building the game in Unreal, which requires level loads, and I wanted to ask you about this too. Basically, some sort of game state manager that is global that would be required for this game, I assume, because you need to keep track of what the player's doing across levels, but it's essentially a linearly loaded game. So even though you're returning to these spaces that you've been to before, they are essentially a new level, right? Yeah. So you go to Hell's Kitchen multiple times, you go to the UNATCO base multiple times, but so you feel like it's a connected, kind of more cohesive world, but it's still essentially linear. And then, and so you get to that section, and then you then can interact with all these NPCs. So not only is the UNATCO base now in this different context because everyone's against you, right? You've been able to walk around this space, with everyone being friendly, and now it's the opposite. And then you're kind of able to confront and talk to all these NPCs that you've had either you've been friends with or what have you, like the hacker, Jaime, and then you can talk to them and actually decide whether you want to try to convince them to, switch sides with you and come with you.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was cool, and it's a choice, right? You can ask them to come or not.
Has that paid off for you in any way? I mean, have they showed up again?
So the hacker is
Alex.
Yeah, Alex shows up at Tracer Tong's. He's there for me because I asked him to come with me, and then he and I feel like there's going to be something up with him that I'm forgetting about later, but he's at Tracer Tong, so you have some conversations with him.
Jaime, I didn't, and I think I missed. I think there was some sub goal that I missed getting out of there escaping, so that he didn't end up there with me, even though I talked to him and said you should.
Yeah. So the sub. So you have to take out Anna.
I did,
or he won't.
Right, but I think I was supposed to go back to him or something like that, and maybe.
Yeah. You have to go back and tell him, because then he gives you a key or something like that to get out.
Weird. I feel like I did that, but that's strange. Huh. Yeah, no, he wasn't there as far as I know.
I asked Jaime to come with me too, but I forget when supposedly he's en route, but I'm not sure when he shows up or if he shows up. But then there's also like an interesting little thing where if you want to, which I did, you can go and hack computers to find out the kill switch words for Anna and Gunther. Did you do that?
I did not.
Yeah, I forget who tells you. I think maybe Jaime tells you. I forget who tells you, or maybe it was Daedalus. But there's a secondary objective where you can go and find computers and hack in using this special login to find out the 2-word combination. So you have to find the specific 2 computers in the base, 2 separate computers, to find out the 2 words. And so when she confronts you, eventually, it goes into dialogue, and he basically says the kill words, and she just blows up.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's cool.
That's
So
amazing.
I hadn't done that before, and so I made sure that I did it this time. And I found the two computers just kind of running, sneaking around.
Yeah, I also looked
Yeah.
online and found a video of how to do it without killing her,
Oh, interesting.
which
Oh,
was
so she's
amazing.
not dead for
Well,
you?
no, I killed her because I couldn't
Oh,
replicate it. I wasn't sure how
it
to do it.
sounds
I wasn't
insane.
sure if I could get there, but it's possible. I watched a video where you basically throw a because the issue is you can't get through the door behind her, unless she's dead. Uh, and so what the person did was he threw one of the grenades,
Lambs.
the lambs, yeah, threw a lamb over there. The lamb did enough damage to destroy the door, and it didn't kill her. So he was able to basically run past her and into the hallway and get out the door on the other side. Of course, losing Alex in the process, I suppose. And then just get out at that rate. And that's kind of amazing. There was no way I was going to be able to do that. And I don't think it almost feels like that non-lethal approach is under supported at that point. Because that's the only character I've actually directly killed.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I did it also with a lamb. I just put one where I was like, oh, she's going to run by here. I'll just put a lamb here, which is normally how I deal with threats. I'll just leave this bomb for them to run by.
Right.
And so it has been, that's the only kill I've done in the whole game.
Impressive. Yeah, that's cool. Well, I definitely killed her with the words, and she literally.
That's amazing. I think that's awesome.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
Self-destructs. Yeah, and the thing is they give you a choice. I don't know what. Oh, I just realized. So they tell you, whoever, I forget who tells you, but they tell you that you can get the kill switch for both of them. Gunther, she and Gunther, and so when you get to those computers, you have to choose which one of them you want the words for, but you only get one of them. And so I chose her, but now that I'm thinking about it, if I chose Gunther, I don't think you meet him there, but I wonder later when you meet him if I had the kill,
they still work.
The kill word, he might actually use it.
He's probably the other character well, it's very difficult not to kill. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just interesting that, again, changing the context for that well understood space that you've been to multiple times and mixing it up in an interesting way is, I mean, they just did a great job of that overall. I mean, Hell's Kitchen is not my favorite section, but you come to it so many times that, it kind of becomes this place where you are familiar with, and they switch it up every time.
Yeah, and it's amazing how overloaded that space is. And yet doesn't feel, because I've now come back to it, I guess, for the third time. And, the first time I had to get into the hotel. This time the second time I basically had to get into the hotel room where my brother was staying and then into the subway. Also, I think that was the time that that one place I couldn't get through before because there was a password. That's when you actually can get the password and you can go into there.
Yeah, right.
So that was the second time around. Yeah. And because that was the thing I was lamenting from the first time is there's this door and I thought I had the password. I just didn't find what other thing used a password in that area. And then now I'm there a third time and I've gone to the bar and it's important to have gone to the bar. I need to meet a couple of people there, et cetera, et cetera. There's some secondary goals. Also, the primary goal to figure out where Stanton Dowd is. But it forces you to go to these different locations that you may have gone to, but that you weren't required to go to. And so it's an interesting way to overload the spaces. I feel like Anachronox might have learned some things from that as well a little bit. Of course, made by the same, made under the same publisher umbrella or developer. I mean, I don't even know. Same studio umbrella. They had two locations, but
I think IDOS published both. No,
IDOS did publish both, but I meant Ion Storm developed.
Yeah, Ion Storm is this weird collective of developers, whatever that was. I guess you could say studio, but it just was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of a weird thing. But yeah,
yeah,
it feels like some lessons learned, and hey, we'll share, and this is what we found for reusing spaces, and it sort of feels that way. Maybe particularly with the various characters that can have things happen to them on the planet. Remember that section in Necronox,
yeah,
where you, depending on what your party composition is, you get different adventures.
yeah, yeah. And the interesting thing about this era, and because I think a lot of developers are trying to crack the nut of reuse and how you can make it interesting and compelling without it feeling repetitious and such. But I mean, from any of that I've had to deal with in the past, I mean, and especially with this game in particular, I would the maintenance of that, meaning because for the most part, I don't know. You correct me if I'm wrong if you think you have a different theory, but probably each of these levels were discrete levels. Ultimately, they shared obviously the core geometry and such, but they were probably maintained separately because it was a linear, like I said earlier, linearly loaded. I don't think they would instance necessarily, and kind of these weren't like true hubs, if you will.
Right.
So if you made a change in one of them from a bug fixing or usability perspective, at some point in development when you were trying to final, you would probably have to make that same change in all locations, all levels, because they weren't the same level.
Right. I would think so, because in particular, the free clinic
is not even,
you can't even go there the second time you're there. And I think you can in the third, although I haven't yet. They mention it.
You can in the third. Yeah. You can in the third. There's a secondary objective there. And there's also,
and there's that area where the soldiers are. There's like another route over to where ultimately you end up the first time you're there. The second time you can kind of go there directly because you're still working for UNATCO and you're investigating, and then of course everybody turns on you. But that's different as well. So I do feel like probably you're right that there's a bunch of stuff that they just had to duplicate and
just fix, like if there's inconsistencies
and re-implement. Exactly.
Yeah. It's just,
or if they wanted to move stuff around, I mean, God forbid, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you wanted to move the entrance to the subway or something, you had to do it in 3 to 4 places.
Yeah.
Depending on, So it's just it's an interesting conundrum of the time, whether, versus these days we would much more try to instance that stuff and, and work in layers.
Right.
And so when you make that change,
presumably
propagates.
I would have to think that the same level designer was responsible for all.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Stuff. So
this day and age, that was possible. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And that's probably the big difference today, is that these days there may not be, and if you had to share that between 2 different people, finding production mechanisms to help those people stay on the same page would be difficult, for sure. So, yeah, wild. All right, so we've gone a long way into a million other things, as we always do. So,
we should just keep. Every episode we'll chip away at
we'll carve out
some of the plot points. Yeah,
I was going to turn to the RPG aspect of taking place in the real world, because we've been talking about Hell's Kitchen, so it seems like a reasonable segue, and we can talk about some of the mechanical stuff next time, and I'll keep track of that. But there's definitely, I mean, we were talking pre-show about something like Dishonored or Dishonored 2, which is in the lineage of this game. And how, even though Dishonored 2 takes place in multiple locations on the world in which it's set, for me as a player, that feels like just one place. They're not significantly distinct. I don't really... there's a map, and I don't look at it and go, oh, look, it's 1,000 miles away. I mean, it's just none of it really... I don't really care in a way that I care about places that exist in my world. And I think that was I mean, given what they're doing, it's obviously the only choice, but it's also a really compelling thing to do. It's fairly uncommon to set an RPG that is a globetrotter like this, going to multiple locations around the world, and feel like they're real places that and distinct, and leveraging that in a way, I guess. That I mean, I just don't. I'm hard pressed to think of other games. I mean, there are other games that go all over the place. I mean, certainly Tomb Raider goes all over the place, and that series, I probably would say something similar about it, where the fact that it's going from here to there to the other place, but that feels like not a connected world in a way in Tomb Raider, whereas this feels like a very interconnected world. I mean, in 2000, globalization was becoming a thing. A thing that we all had to think about, and how it was going to impact economies around the world, but especially at home, because that's what we care about, being as nationalist as we are. So there was just, I don't know, it's just an interesting time to tackle a real world game that has all these themes in it.
Yeah. That was on that were on people's, was on people's minds, about how all that stuff. I don't know. I just feel like there was a paranoia around Y2K. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And of course, yeah, even today, it's gone in a whole nother direction of anxiety, but it fit well. And I think, to be honest, not to just use his example again because I'm such a big fan of it, but I feel like that was one of the successes of the X-Files at that time too. I think they hit at the right time. That show hit at the right time for where people's heads were at, art imitating life and all of that. And everyone was kind of like, was ready for that kind of mentality because of course the government, there's shady shit going on. Sorry, clean cast.
Yep, it's fine.
Damn it.
I'll just beep you out.
Yeah. I mean, just shadiness going on. And so people were eating that stuff up. And this was a similar thing. It's like, yeah, going to Hell's Kitchen. Well, even just the first level and the fact that the UNATCO base is below the Statue of Liberty, and to see the Statue of Liberty destroyed, right. And then to have some history, because if you go up, I think you go up to one of the pieces, there's plaques there that talk about the event,
about how it happened,
right? The terrorist event, which also then hits close to home, a year later, unfortunately, and so there's just this sort of kind of bold move to show the gravity of what can happen to governmental organizations, right. in a melodramatic way, of course, right? It's not like a super serious game, but at least tried to hit some themes in a time when there were still the id style games out there that were not taking themselves, in the same seriousness as this is.
Well, and geopolitically, the European Union was right around this time, I think the year before, and NAFTA was a good point. 5 or 6 years before this. So that's opening of borders here in North America, for trade anyway. So don't get me started, but there's definitely a paranoia about sovereignty, and all of those forces sort of motivate basically the bad guys in this game as well. There's personal determination, or finding your own destiny and things like that sort of fall out of the Enlightenment, but of course have curdled by the time we've reached the year 2000 in lots of ways. I mean, there's just a huge heady mix there of that stuff, but I think you could not have made any of that stuff land thematically if it were not set here on Earth, even if it was 75 years in the future or whatever at the time. Kudos. I think that's amazing, and it really strengthens the sense that I feel like I'm playing a real character in this world. So,
as you were talking, as you started this topic up, I was trying to think of some other examples that would come to mind, and one that isn't exactly the same thing, but it hit close enough for me was were both Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. And though they weren't they didn't name the cities exactly the same. You generally knew, I forget some of the, the iteration on the name of Los Angeles. I don't remember. What did they call it? Anyway, when
it wasn't like the City of the Dead or something.
You see, it was, you kind of knew which city you were in, even though the name wasn't exactly the same, and you had this sense of coming out of a vault in California, and then, essentially traveling, to these places that you could imagine. So for me, at least, I remember playing that. We played that for the podcast, but I remember playing it back in the day, both that and two, because they hit other cities in two, where you get the sense of, I actually came out of the vault in California, and I am traveling from the city to city, and this is what it would be like if the apocalypse hit, the States and stuff. And so it definitely had more gravity versus, say, the two, fantasy worlds that are always near and dear to my heart, but I just have never had a good sense of geography and relativity of that geography, is obviously Middle Earth and Narnia. Like I've, finally watching, which I still think you haven't watched the films, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Middle Earth. Yeah. That's a
you're gonna get some email. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, no, that's sorry. I had to reveal that little trivia for the podcast, everybody. Brett will never watch the films because he doesn't want to ruin the books. So kudos to him. But everything's in my head when you read the books feels so far away. And then you watch the movies and it's like, actually,
oh my God, they covered half the planet in 2 hours.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, some of it's that, but some of it is I think they did a relatively good job at showing what the geography actually is supposed to be, but you just don't have the context.
Yeah.
So it's just to your point, it's just helpful to have just that in an RPG sense. It's just as rare. I never played. What is that spy thriller RPG that Obsidian did?
Alpha Protocol.
Alpha Protocol. I never played that, but I always was
intrigued.
A
copy for you.
Oh, really? Was it any good?
I haven't played it yet either, but I happen to own 2 copies.
How funny.
Because at one point I said, oh, I should totally play this. And I bought a copy. And then at another point I said, oh, I should totally play this. And I bought a copy.
It's intriguing because I like spy stuff.
When I send you your Metal Gear Solid 2 or 3 or whatever it is I'm sending.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I will send it along with that because I have your copy of whatever that is. I think 2. It's it's definitely a thing I want to play, and I think that's part of it. What I've heard about that game in particular is that if you ignore the things that it's not particularly good at, the shooting and things like that, and just play like the parts where you can just make decisions about what to do, like in the dialogue or in your character build or whatever, and just play different types of games. You can play the whole game in like 2 hours, and you can just see this huge variety of ways it could play out if you just play it again and again and again, which is really attractive to me. So I am curious about that. That is one thing about Deus Ex that I sort of probably wouldn't mind. I mean, although we're both playing it. For me, this is just the second time, but we're playing it again. It is a game that is a little daunting to play again because as we're playing it, we're reminded, oh my goodness, it's actually way larger.
It's taken us longer.
Yeah, I mean, certainly and playing as a stealth character,
especially the way you're playing. Yeah, you're probably doubling your time, I bet. And I'm just not only am I barnstorming through, but I'm actually not doing. Because I've done it before, I'm not reading all the emails and finding all of the extra stuff. I'm skipping pretty much all that stuff.
I've been skipping a fair amount of stuff as well, but I still feel like there's a lot of spaces that I make my way through several times to try to do it well. Yeah, for stealth.
Yeah, because you have to experiment. But for anyone who hasn't played it before and is playing with us, though, definitely recommend not skipping that stuff. Like hack into, if you really want more of the sort of the backstory, definitely hack into the computers and read the emails and find the data logs and stuff, because there's just a lot of good. We're not talking a lot about it in the podcast because we're not playing through it, and I don't remember most of it, but I remember at least at the time just eating that stuff up, because they just did a great job.
There's more character development that happens in there.
Yeah, and the backstory, the organizations, and
the organizations and how they fit together, and there's just a ton of stuff in all of that. So anyway, well, we put a pin in it there, because we've covered probably less than half of the stuff we're gonna. That's fine. We'll cover it all.
Packing in the full rest of the story for the last episode is going to be challenging, but we may have to just like barnstorm through like 10 to 20 solid minutes of just catch up and then finish. You know what I mean? Like finish it off before we do closing thoughts and stuff. But
we'll see how it goes. We have some mechanical stuff to talk about, but we'll get there.
We're hitting most of it.
I gave you, because we're here at the end, we've been going an hour, and I don't think we really need a break. We just have the one review we're going to read this week. It's great to get those reviews. It helps us reach new listeners, preferably through the Apple Podcasts app, and I guess iTunes or whatever that you want to use. We also had an email. I'll go ahead and mention that now before we read the review from Darren. I've shot him an email, but we're going to read Darren's next week because it's topical for something we'll talk about next week. So Darren, put a pin in it. We'll get back to you. In the meantime, and Darren sent his to devgameclub@gmail.com. Why don't you go ahead and read us that review?
Okay, the review is, title of the review is, this podcast is for you if you like game devs. If you like game devs talking about one game for at least 3+ hours, from Conrad the Canadian. That's great. I see it in his PS. He embellishes on that.
It goes head on. Yep.
Yeah. About 3 years ago, I Googled video game podcast made by devs, in quotes. Awesome. I wanted to listen to people who made games and not just listen to YouTubers/streamers who superficially play them and mostly complain about games. Anyway, if you want to hear two friends geek out on video games, then you'll enjoy listening to Tim and Brett. Why? Because they take at least 3 episodes to talk about one game. This extra attention into one game brings out insights and gameplay, design, art, music that you can't get anywhere else. No other podcast does this. By the way, I'm not a game dev. I don't necessarily like some of the games they play, but as a fan of gaming, what Tim and Brett talk about is very interesting, no matter what game they are playing. And knowing a bit about older games and what it took to make them in some way makes playing new games more enjoyable. P.S. Yes, Conrad is my real name. Thank you for clarifying. And I know Tim is a fan of Conan the Barbarian, as I am. So yeah, Conrad the Canadian, Conan the Barbarian. Love it. Thank you. That's awesome. I think we're proud that there aren't that many kind of dev podcasts out there. I love a lot of gaming podcasts, but there's mostly either influencers or press or fans or something. Yeah. So
or reviewers and things like that. People in the journalism side. I particularly appreciate pointing out the fact that we go deep on these games, which is very uncommon because most game podcasts are more flavor of the week, sort of, this is what's out and let's talk about it, which totally fine. But I think when you go deeper and longer on some of these games, you reveal hidden crannies and stuff that you're like, it would be nice to see more of that. I'd forgotten about this aspect or what have you. And you could really gloss over that even if you're playing the most up-to-date game, because you're often not spending that kind of time to really dig into what that is. It does mean that we limit our games to games that we think will provoke that kind of rich discussion. But definitely we appreciate that. So thank you very much, Conrad, the Canadian.
Well, and I mean, I think as is the case for this episode, clearly we probably always could talk more about the games. We run out of time as it is, even doing multiple episodes on a game, because there's just so much to talk about.
There really is. Oh man, so much. Okay, well, I guess that's about it for this week. We're going to finish this game by next week. I say that with a rising inflection to my voice because
I mean, I guess we could do 5 episodes.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what I get through in this next week. I am
okay.
still
You're gonna play by
fighting my RSI, but I think we should try to. It is a game that I think has plenty to talk about, so it's maybe possible.
We definitely could do more. 5.
Yeah,
as long as you find Dowd quickly. This next section will be better for you.
Yeah,
I had a ridiculously dumb time finding him. Yeah, so
yeah,
it does. I think you're right. It does speed up. So.
Yeah, no, I think it does tend to wind down kind of quickly towards the end. But we have all that Area 51 stuff to do.
Yeah, so maybe keep me posted, and we'll. Even though we're on air discussing this, we'll see. I'm flexible. We can stretch it out. Still seeing if we can nail down a guest as well. So
yeah, at least one. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening. Again, you can shoot us an email at devgameclub@gmail.com. And of course, you can find the podcast on Twitter at devgameclub. I'm on that daily. We love to have your reviews through Apple Podcasts. It helps us find new listeners and such. And of course, you can find me on Twitter as well at Brett_Duville and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
And thanks for listening. Good night.
Good night.